Hi, I'm Dr. George Yancey. Let's share some paradigms. And the paradigm we'll share today concerns secularization, inevitable. There's a sociological theory known as secularization. You probably have heard some variation of this theory. And the theory goes something like this, that back in more traditional societies, people relied on religion, they relied on the supernatural, superstition. But as we modernize, for a variety of different reasons, we're moving away from religion, moving away from the supernatural. And we're going to build our societies on secular values rather than religious values. And if you look at theories such as Marxian theory, the belief is that religion will eventually wither away. Fewer and fewer of us will believe in the supernatural, will believe in gods, goddesses, whatever. As we become more modernized, as we become more aware of science, science is going to replace religion. And that's just the way it is. It's going to be part of an evolution, if you will. So this has been the notion of secularization. Now, for a long time, the people who support secularization argued that religion would go away completely. They've adjusted that a little bit more, that religion would lose its impact. It's become clearer that even in very secular societies, there are some people who still believe. So the notion that we're going to get rid of belief completely has sort of vanished. But the idea was that religion was going to lose its impact. This thorn in this theory for the longest time has been the United States. Europe has been secularized for decades, maybe even a century now. We've seen a secularization of Europe. And you go over to Europe, you'll find believers, but they're relatively few and far between. The United States persisted for having high levels of religious belief. The United States persisted in having religion impact the political economy. And so for a long time, until say about 20 years ago, it seemed that, well, secularization, but not in America. Recently, though, we've seen what's been known as the growth of the nuns. Now, the nuns is not Catholics. The nuns is none of the above. People who look at religious questions and put none. Not necessarily atheist or agnostic, but not religious. And we've seen a dramatic growth in these nuns over the past 20 years. And what happened was people began to think, aha, secularization is coming to the United States. Now, one of the things that I see as happening as I look at the data on this is that the percentage of people who are highly religious has really not changed very much. What's changed was the people who are more moderately religious. They've tended to become more secular. So there is a sense where there's an overstatement of secularization. And indeed, over the past 3 or 4 years, the growth of the nuns has plateaued. It's grown only perhaps as much as it's going to grow. Now, it's still, our country is more secular than it has been. It's more secular than it was when I was growing up. The notions of accepting religion is more challenged than it was when I was growing up. So there has been more secularization, but it may not reach the levels of Europe. And of course, we'll wait and see. But is it inevitable? And surprisingly, to answer no, it's not inevitable, I go back to Europe. You see, something interesting happened in Europe. The percentage of Christians dropped dramatically. One of the things that happened, though, is as there's fewer religious individuals, one thing that's correlated with religiosity is childbearing. And so the birth rate in Europe dropped dramatically. It's creating a real problem. Consider, if you have smaller and smaller young cohorts, who's going to work to take care of the elderly who are retired, who can no longer work? So how do Europe solve this problem? Well, one of the ways, and I'm not saying they went to some back room and said, oh, we have this problem, let's do this to solve it, but here's how the problem was solved. Immigration. Now, when I say immigration in the United States, you think Hispanics, perhaps Asians. In Europe, immigration meant Muslims. And so as the Christian population has gone down, what's happened is the Muslim population has gone up. And Muslims have not assimilated into the European culture as easily as Catholic Hispanics assimilate into the United States. It's created some problems over in Europe, some conflict over in Europe. And it's also created a persistent religious class. They're just not Christians. And indeed, given the birth rate of Muslims and the low birth rate of secular Europeans, it is not out of the realm of possibility that 30, 40 years from now, some of those European countries may become Muslim countries. Maybe not Muslim countries the way Iran or Iraq is, but countries where Muslims are the numerical dominant force, win elections. We'll see what happens. Secularization may not be going away in Europe, just may be changing face. I think this has a message for secularization in general. The problem with secularization is that secular people, for a variety of reasons, do not have kids at the same rate as religious people. Which means that for secularization to persist, secular people have to convince religious people or the kids of the religious people to become secular. Now, there are ways that can happen, true. Our school system, things of this nature. So that can happen. But you have to maintain that because once those kids become secular, then they adapt the habits of secular people, which means not having kids. Can that persist? It's not persisting in Europe. I think we see some evidence when we look at some of the religious growth among some of the yoga cohorts here in the United States that's not going to persist in the United States either. Before we go on, let me just go ahead and say, if you enjoyed this sort of analysis, if this is something that you appreciate, please give me a like. If you have a comment, please, negative or positive, please do that. If you want to get more of this delivered to you, consider subscribing. I'm trying to create a space for Christians who are neither left nor right, and we can talk about these issues. We don't have to get into our polarized or partisan battles over it. Okay, so individuals don't now have the growth rate. What this means is that countries will only secularize so far, and then will rebound to become religious. And the vision of the secularist theorists was too short-sighted. It looked at immediate growth and secularization, did not appreciate the long-term consequences of religiosity and birth rate. Now, I do say that there is one exception to this, where secular individuals do have a decent birth rate, but it may be something that is not desirable. There's some evidence that in the old Soviet Union that there was a sufficient birth rate. The Soviet Union was a very secular country. Why there was a sufficient birth rate? Well, there was certain types of government oppression that sort of pressured people to have kids. The beauty of secularization by the minds of the people who support it is that in a secular society we'll have more individual freedom, we'll be able to choose what we want to do, we'll have autonomy. But what if that autonomy is the reason why you have lower birth rates? And the only way to escape that and remain secular is to have an oppressive government. As I said, not a pleasant choice. For these reasons, I don't think secularization, the way envisioned by those who support it, where it creates a sort of utopia, is inevitable, and in the long term, I don't see it as likely. And indeed, what religious individuals can do is have kids and raise them up so that their kids are religious as well. If they do that, eventually their numbers will catch up with those who are secular, and then that will prevent the society from becoming a strongly secular society. Once again, thanks for coming by. I hope this was interesting to you. If it was, come back. We can shatter some more paradigms.